The city of Nova Zenith was always alive, its streets buzzing with the endless hum of traffic, neon signs flickering in the night, and the distant echo of sirens weaving through the urban symphony. Among the millions who called it home, one person's life was about to change forever: Ethan. Cole had always been ordinary, or so he thought, a software developer by trade. He spent his days debugging code and his nights lost. In the world of comic books and science fiction, his only thrill came from dreaming about adventures he'd never have. That was until the night. And everything changed. It was late, and the glow of his monitor was the only source of light. In his cramped apartment, the air was thick with the scent of cold coffee, and his fingers ached from hours of typing. Just as he was about to call it a night, a sudden blackout plunged the entire block into darkness. Deep hum filled the air. The sound vibrated through his bones, resonating with something inside him. His skin tingled, his breath hitched, and then a blinding pulse of blue energy exploded through the room. It surged into his body, every nerve igniting, as if his very essence was being rewritten. Pain seared through his veins. But it wasn't just pain, it was power. He could feel something stirring within him, an energy foreign yet familiar. He stumbled to the bathroom, gripping the sink as he struggled to steady his breathing. The reflection staring back at him was no longer just Ethan Cole. His eyes, once a dull hazel, now glowed with an eerie electric blue. Veins of light pulsed beneath his skin, crackling with raw energy. His heart raced as he flexed his fingers, watching arcs of blue electricity dance between them. What the hell? His voice trembled as he clenched his fists, and the light intensified. Panic set in. Was he hallucinating, dreaming? He turned to grab his phone, but the moment his fingers brushed against it, the device shattered in a burst of static. His breath came in ragged gasps. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain: his life would never be the same again. Ethan staggered back from the shattered phone, his mind racing. The air around him crackled with energy, the faint scent of ozone lingering in his small apartment. His heart pounded against his ribs as he flexed his fingers, watching thin arcs of blue lightning flicker between them. He needed air. Grabbing his jacket, careful not to touch anything metallic, he rushed out into the city streets. The night was cool, the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. People moved past him, their faces illuminated by the neon signs above. He pulled his hood up, hands tucked deep into his pockets as he fought to steady his breathing. "What the hell is happening to me?" he muttered under his breath. A sudden vibration shot through his body, as if something was calling to him. A strange pull, an invisible force guiding him. He wasn't sure why, but his feet carried him toward the abandoned subway tunnels on the east side of Nova Zenith. The deeper he went, the stronger the energy inside him felt. The tunnels were silent, save for the distant echo of dripping water. His hands tingled as he reached a rusted maintenance door. He barely touched it before the metal screeched and flew open, the hinges sparking with blue light. He stumbled inside. The space was dark, lined with old lockers and dusty equipment. Something in his gut told him this was where he needed to be. He took a deep breath and reached out. This time, instead of fear, he focused. The energy within him responded instantly. Electricity arced from his fingertips, illuminating the room in erratic flashes. He gritted his teeth. Control it. He stretched his hands forward, concentrating. Slowly, the wild sparks calmed, forming into smooth, controlled currents that flowed between his palms. A grin crept onto his face, then footsteps. Ethan whirled around. A shadow moved at the entrance. Before he could react, a deep voice echoed through the chamber. "So you're the one they've been looking for." Ethan's pulse spiked. He had no idea who they were, but something told him he was about to find out. Ethan's muscles tensed as he turned toward the shadowed figure, standing at the entrance of the tunnel. His newly awakened senses sharpened, picking up every detail: the faint crunch of gravel beneath the stranger's boots, the steady rhythm of his breath, the slight hum of something metallic on his belt. Whoever this was, they weren't just some lost drifter. The figure stepped forward, revealing himself under the flickering tunnel lights. He was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a long, reinforced coat with armored plating across the shoulders and chest. Sleek visor covered his eyes. Glowing faintly with red circuitry, Ethan took a step back. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied Ethan, his gaze assessing, as if scanning every inch of him. Then, in a voice calm but firm, he spoke. "My name is Orion, and you just lit up the city like a damn beacon." Ethan's fingers twitched as residual sparks danced between them. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the energy flowing through him. "I don't know what's happening to me." Orion tilted his head slightly. "You were activated." "Activated?" Ethan's brow furrowed. What does that even mean? Orion let out a small sigh, as if deciding how much to say. "You have a gift, kid, but right now, you're a walking hazard. Your power's unstable, and if you don't learn to control it fast, you'll burn yourself out, or worse, attract the wrong kind of attention." Ethan swallowed hard. The idea of his body burning out sent a chill through him. "So, what? You're here to help?" "I'm here to keep you alive." Orion turned, motioning for Ethan to follow. "Come with me, there's something you need to see." The hideout. Ethan hesitated, but felt the same strange pull inside him, the same force that had led him here. Against his better judgment, he followed Orion deeper into the tunnels. After several turns through narrow passageways, they reached a steel door reinforced with heavy locks. Orion placed his palm against a panel, and with a soft beep, the door slid open, revealing a hidden underground facility. Inside, dim lights flickered to life, illuminating what looked like an old training center. Workbenches lined the walls, filled with high-tech gadgets, blueprints, and weapons. At the center of the room, a metallic mannequin stood, draped in something that immediately caught Ethan's eye: a suit. It was sleek, dark, and made of an advanced material that shimmered faintly under the light. Faint blue energy conduits ran along its arms and chest, pulsing in sync with his own powers. The suit was built for him. Ethan stepped closer. "What is this?" "Your first step toward survival." Orion crossed his arms. "I designed this for people like you, people who don't have time to figure things out the hard way. The material will help regulate your energy output, and the conduits will channel your electricity instead of letting it destroy everything you touch." Ethan ran his fingers over the fabric, feeling a strange connection to it. The idea of a suit was something out of a comic book, but standing here, with power surging through his veins, it felt right. "You expect me to just put this on and start playing hero?" Ethan scoffed, though a part of him already knew he would. Orion smirked. "No, I expect you to train, because whether you like it or not, kid, you've already entered the game." Ethan exhaled slowly, staring at the suit. He could feel the weight of the moment where his life was about to change forever. After a long pause, he reached for the suit. Ethan hesitated as his fingers hovered over the suit. The material was smooth but firm, almost as if it were alive, reacting to his touch. Blue veins of energy pulsed subtly across the fabric, mirroring the electricity coursing beneath his own skin. Orion watched him carefully. "The suit is more than just armor. It's a conduit designed to help you focus your abilities. Right now, you're leaking power like a broken circuit. This will help stabilize you." Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders before gripping the suit fully. The moment he did, he felt a faint charge run through his fingertips, like static electricity pulling toward him. He stepped back, taking a deep breath before stripping off his hoodie and shirt, revealing lean muscle beneath. His skin still shimmered faintly with electric currents, small sparks flickering along his arms. Slipping into the suit was easier than he expected. The fabric adjusted to his form, molding to his body as if it had been tailored specifically for him. As soon as the last piece locked into place, something shifted inside him. The chaotic energy surging through him suddenly felt balanced, controlled. Ethan flexed his fingers, watching the way the suit responded. When he clenched his fist, the blue lines along his arms pulsed in sync with his breath. The wild sparks that had once flickered uncontrollably were now precise, contained within the pathways of the suit's design. Orion smirked. Not bad. Ethan turned his hands over, still marveling at the sensation. I can feel it, like it's guiding my energy instead of fighting against it. That's the point. Orion stepped forward. Before, your power was raw, unfocused. The suit helps you channel it properly. But the real test is seeing what you can do with it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean training? Orion gestured toward the far end of the hideout, where a massive reinforced chamber stood. That's right. You might have power, kid, but power without discipline is just destruction waiting to happen. Ethan swallowed hard, his mind flashing back to his apartment, the broken phone, the door flying off its hinges, the fear of losing control. He clenched his fists. All right, he said, stepping forward. Let's do this. Orion nodded approvingly and led the way toward the training chamber. As Ethan followed, he felt something stir deep inside him, something new. For the first time since this all started, he wasn't afraid. The reinforced chamber loomed before Ethan, its metal walls lined with scorch marks, deep claw-like gashes, and dents that told stories of battles fought within. Overhead, flickering lights cast a dim glow over the space. This was no ordinary training room. It was a war zone designed to push its occupants to their limits. Orion strode to a control panel on the far side. Flipping a few switches, a mechanical hum filled the air as the walls shifted, revealing a series of automated turrets, obstacle courses, and humanoid combat drones. Ethan took a deep breath, flexing his fingers as small sparks crackled across his knuckles. The suit was keeping his energy contained, but for how long? He still didn't understand what he was capable of, and the thought of losing control in the middle of a fight made his stomach churn. You ready? Orion called out. Ethan glanced at him, jaw tightening. I don't even know what I'm doing. That's why we're here. Orion tapped a button, and the turrets whirred to life. Lesson 1. Survival. Before Ethan could react, the first turret locked onto him and fired a stun blast. His instincts screamed at him to dodge, but his body was too slow. The shot struck his shoulder, sending him stumbling back as a jolt of pain shot through him. Damn it! Move your feet, kid, Orion barked. You're thinking too much. Another turret swiveled, firing a second shot. This time Ethan managed to duck, the blast scorching the metal floor behind him. More turrets activated, forming a web of energy bolts raining down on him. Ethan's heart pounded, every muscle in his body tensed. But something inside him was shifting, his vision sharpened. Time seemed to slow. The electricity flowing within him pulsed, reacting to the danger. Without thinking, he threw his hands up. A crackling barrier of blue energy erupted around him, absorbing the impact of two shots before, shattering like glass. Orion raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Ethan panted, glancing at his hands in shock. I made a shield? You didn't make anything, Orion corrected. Your body did. Your power is reacting to stress. Now you need to control it. Before Ethan could respond, the floor beneath him shifted, a panel opened, and 3 humanoid combat drones emerged. Their red eyes flickered to life. They raised their batons, surging forward with mechanical precision. Ethan barely had time to react before the first drone swung. He jumped back, narrowly avoiding a strike that would have knocked him unconscious. The second drone lunged, aiming for his ribs. He twisted, trying to dodge. Too slow. The impact sent him sprawling. Sparks flared across his vision, and pain shot through his side. Orion's side. Get up! Ethan groaned, pushing himself onto his hands and knees. His mind raced. He couldn't keep dodging. He needed to fight back. Another drone charged. This time, instead of dodging, Ethan let the energy build inside him. He could feel it rising, a storm coiling within his chest. Let it out. He thrust his hands forward. A burst of electricity shot from his palms, arcing through the air like a lightning strike. The bolt struck the drone square in the chest, sending it flying backward in a shower of sparks. Ethan's eyes widened. Whoa, Orion smirked. Now we're getting somewhere. The remaining 2 drones hesitated for Hoffa. Second, just enough time for Ethan to press his advantage. He clenched his fists, channeling his power. Blue energy crackled along his arms as he surged forward. Moving faster than before, the second drone swung its baton. Ethan ducked low, spinning beneath it. He released a short-range pulse of energy from his palm, blasting the drone off its feet. The final drone attacked, but Ethan was ready. He pivoted, instinctively raising his arm. The suit's conduits absorbed the blow, dispersing the impact. Without thinking, he lashed out, slamming his palm into the drone's chest. A controlled shockwave erupted from his hand, sending the machine crashing against the wall. Silence filled the chamber. Ethan stood there, breath heavy, hands still crackling with electricity. His heart pounded, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was exhilaration. Orion folded his arms. Not bad for a rookie. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow. Not bad? I just took out 3 robots. Orion chuckled. You survived 3 robots. There's a difference. He tapped a button and the training room powered down. You've got potential, but potential means nothing if you don't refine it. You need control, and control takes time. Ethan exhaled slowly, looking down at his hands. The power within him still pulsed, still thrummed with energy. But for the first time it felt manageable. He glanced up at Orion. All right then, what's next? Orion grinned. Now we see what happens when you really push yourself. Ethan barely had time to catch his breath before Orion walked over and slapped a new command into the console. The training chamber rumbled, and the walls shifted again, revealing something far more intense. A sprawling urban simulation. Buildings rose from the ground like massive puzzle pieces clicking into place. Streetlights flickered to life, casting eerie shadows across what looked like an abandoned city street. Cars, dumpsters, and alleyways formed a maze of obstacles. Ethan turned to Orion. Okay, this is a step up. Orion smirked. Lesson 2, adaptation. Real fights don't happen in a safe, enclosed room. They happen in unpredictable environments against unpredictable enemies. He tapped a few more buttons, and red warning lights flashed overhead. Then the simulation came to life. From the rooftops, robotic sentries emerged, their targeting systems locking onto Ethan. On the streets, humanoid drones, more advanced than before, moved with unsettling precision. But the worst part, a mechanical howl echoed through the air. Ethan's stomach twisted as he saw it, a towering, 4-legged combat drone. Its metallic body resembling a wolf fused with a tank. The moment its glowing eyes locked onto him, it let out another piercing howl and charged. Seriously. Ethan shot Orion a glare. Orion leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You'll thank me later, maybe. The mechanical beast lunged. Ethan barely dodged in time. He felt the rush of air as its claws slashed the ground where he had been standing. The pavement cracked under the force of the attack. He rolled behind a car, gripping the edge of the hood. All right. Focus. His fingers twitched as he concentrated, feeling the energy build inside him. The suit hummed in response, regulating his power. When he stepped out, he thrust his hands forward. A bolt of electricity shot toward the beast. Striking its shoulder, sparks exploded, and for a moment it stumbled. Then, with terrifying speed, it adapted. Plates along its body shifted, absorbing the residual energy. Oh, come on. The machine's glowing eyes flared brighter. It had learned from his attack. The next second, the beast opened its jaws, and a pulse of raw energy blasted toward him. Ethan barely had time to throw up his arms. A surge of instinct took over, and the suit reacted. A translucent blue shield flickered into existence. The energy blast struck, but instead of overwhelming him, the shield absorbed and dispersed the impact. The force sent him sliding back, but he was still standing. Ethan grinned. All right, maybe I can work with this. He pivoted and sprinted toward an alleyway, weaving through the urban maze. As the drones pursued him, the smaller humanoid units moved fast, their synthetic bodies leaping over obstacles. Like trained operatives, one of them landed directly in front of him, swinging a blade-like appendage. Ethan barely ducked in time, rolling across the pavement. He clenched his fist, channeling a concentrated pulse of electricity. and struck forward. His punch connected, and the drone exploded in a burst of sparks, but he didn't have time to celebrate. The mechanical beast was back, leaping onto a nearby rooftop before launching itself. At him again, Ethan gritted his teeth. Need to think differently. His usual blasts wouldn't work. So maybe something bigger would. As the beast descended, he planted his feet and pulled the energy inward, deeper than before. His suit's conduits pulsed, adjusting to the increased charge. His vision sharpened. At the last second, he released everything. A massive electrical shockwave erupted from his body. The blast caught the beast midair, sending it crashing into a streetlight. Sparks exploded across its frame as it struggled to recover. Ethan stood, breath heavy, electricity crackling around him. The energy inside him wasn't just power, it was momentum. The beast growled, trying to rise. Ethan didn't let it. He sprinted forward, lightning dancing in his palms. With a final leap, he punched straight through the machine's core. The impact sent a massive surge through its systems, frying it instantly. The beast let out a distorted howl before collapsing, its eyes flickering out. Silence filled the air. The remaining drones powered down as the simulation ended. Ethan stood there, panting, his body still vibrating with adrenaline. He turned to Orion, who was watching him with a knowing smirk. "Not bad," Orion said. "Still sloppy, though." Ethan let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah? Next time I'll try not to punch a giant robot." Orion walked over, clapping him on the shoulder. "You adapted. That's what matters. But don't get cocky. Your real enemies won't stop, just because you pull off one good move." Ethan nodded, rolling his shoulders. "So, what now?" Orion's expression darkened. He turned toward a screen displaying citywide surveillance footage. "Now we stop playing in simulations," he said. "You're ready for the real world." On the screen, a new figure appeared, a masked individual standing atop a skyscraper, their silhouette barely visible against the neon skyline. A message was left behind in glowing red letters. "The Stormbringer is coming." Ethan narrowed his eyes. He didn't know who or what that was, but something told him he was about to find out. Ethan stared at the screen, his heartbeat still racing from the training session. The name Stormbringer pulsed in bold red letters, etched onto the side of a skyscraper, like a digital brand against the city's skyline. "Who the hell is the Stormbringer?" Ethan muttered. Orion didn't answer right away. He stood still, his eyes locked on the screen, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and firm. "He's not just anyone. He's the reason I built that suit for you." Ethan turned to him, confused. "What?" Orion exhaled, rubbing his temples as if debating how much to say. Finally, he walked over to a separate console, inputting a series of commands. The main screen flickered, pulling up archived footage. The first video played, a nightmarish scene of a city street, completely torn apart. Buildings scorched black, cars flipped over and melted. The pavement cracked, as if something had struck it with unimaginable force. And at the center of it all, a single figure stood amid the destruction, their silhouette wreathed in electricity. Their long coat billowed in the wind, the edges lined with crackling arcs of blue lightning. The footage zoomed in, and though their face remained masked, their eyes, glowing electric white, seemed to bore into Ethan's soul. "This was taken a year ago," Orion said. "Stormbringer appeared out of nowhere, wiped out a Black Ops team in less than 3 minutes, then disappeared like a ghost." Ethan swallowed hard. "And you think I have something to do with him?" "I know you do," Orion said. "Your powers, your activation weren't random. Someone unlocked them, and Stormbringer has been looking for people like you." He crossed his arms. "The question is, does he want you as an ally or an enemy?" Ethan clenched his jaw. The weight of everything was crashing down on him. First, discovering his powers, then barely surviving the training, and now, this. A living storm of destruction that might be hunting him. Orion pointed at the screen. "He left that message for a reason. He knows about you now." Ethan took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Then I guess I need to find him before he finds me." Orion's lips curled into a small smirk. "Now you're thinking like a soldier." The hunt begins. Within the hour, Ethan and Orion were on the move. They left the underground hideout, stepping into the city under the cover of night. Ethan had never truly seen the city like this. His heightened senses picked up every flicker of neon, every electrical pulse humming through power lines, every crackle of static in the air. Orion led him through back alleys and abandoned rooftops, moving like a shadow. "Stormbringer doesn't just announce himself without a reason," Orion said as they moved. "He's either waiting for you to respond or setting up something bigger." Ethan glanced up at the skyline, his instincts tingling. "I can feel something," he murmured, "like the air is charged." "Good," Orion said. "Means you're starting to tap into your connection with energy. Use it, trust it." As they moved deeper into the city, Ethan's gut twisted. The feeling was growing stronger. Something was here. And then a surge of electricity tore through the night sky, striking a nearby radio tower. Sparks exploded, raining down over the rooftops. The impact sent a powerful shockwave through the air, rattling Ethan's bones. Orion grabbed his shoulder, pushing him back behind cover. "That's him." Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He turned toward the source of the blast, and there, standing atop the ruined tower, was Stormbringer. The figure stood tall, cloaked in shadows, the arcs of energy flickering around him, illuminating his masked face. His presence radiated power, the very air around him humming with static. Then he raised a single hand and pointed directly at Ethan. Ethan's breath caught. Orion tensed. "Get ready, kid, because I don't think he's here for a friendly chat." The rooftop seemed to crackle with raw energy as Stormbringer stood motionless, his outstretched hand pointing directly at Ethan. The neon glow of the city cast shifting shadows across his masked face, but those piercing electric white eyes never wavered. Ethan swallowed hard, his instincts screaming at him to move, to prepare for an attack, but something held him in place, a force beyond logic. It was as if an invisible current connected them, an unspoken charge humming between them like two opposing poles of a magnet. Orion, however, had no such hesitation. He moved like a predator, stepping in front of Ethan, his hand inching toward the weapon holstered at his side. "If you've got something to say, say it," he called out, "or we'll assume you're here to start a fight." Stormbringer tilted his head slightly. Then, for the first time, he spoke. His voice was deep, distorted, as if layered with static. "He is not ready." Ethan's fists clenched. "Not ready for what?" Stormbringer took a slow step forward, his coat billowing as another surge of energy flickered around him. "For the war that's coming." Orion's eyes narrowed. "You're being real vague, pal." Stormbringer ignored him, keeping his focus locked on Ethan. "You've felt it, haven't you? The way your body hums with power, the way you see electricity in ways others can't. You're connected to something bigger than you understand." Ethan hesitated. "You mean my powers?" Stormbringer took another step forward. "I mean your purpose." The words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories, how his abilities had awakened, how Orion had trained him, how everything seemed to be accelerating like a storm building on the horizon. "Explain," Ethan demanded. Stormbringer exhaled, the air distorting around him as if the very atmosphere was bending under his presence. "You are not the only one. There are others like you, connected to the storm, bound to the currents that flow through the world. Some are waking up. Some have already been taken." Orion stiffened. "Taken?" Stormbringer nodded. "By them." The way he said it sent a jolt of unease through Ethan. "Who's them?" For the first time, Stormbringer hesitated. Then with a low growl, he lifted his hands, and in an instant, the entire rooftop was engulfed in a brilliant web of electricity. Ethan instinctively raised his arms, bracing for impact, but the energy didn't attack him. It crackled around them, forming a shifting, chaotic barrier that cut off the outside world. Stormbringer's eyes flashed. "They're already watching, listening. If I speak their name here, they will come." Ethan exchanged a glance with Orion, then looked back at Stormbringer. "Then what do we do?" Stormbringer's mask tilted slightly. "You follow me, or you stay here and wait for them to find you first." Ethan's pulse pounded. This was it, his moment to decide. Orion had trained him, but this man, this Stormbringer, seemed to have the answers he was looking for. Orion tensed beside him.
Careful, kid.
He's not giving us the full picture. Stormbringer extended a hand toward Ethan. Choose, but choose quickly. The air vibrated with tension. The storm had arrived, and Ethan had to decide whether to step into it or run the other way. Ethan's breath was steady, but his mind was a storm of questions. Stormbringer's outstretched hand crackled with electricity, the air thick with tension. The choice loomed before him like a crossroads he could never turn back from. Orion stepped forward. Don't do it, kid. We don't know what he wants. Ethan didn't move. His heart pounded as he locked eyes with Stormbringer. This wasn't just a decision about following a stranger. It was about uncovering the truth behind his powers. Orion had trained him, but he had always held back. Stormbringer, on the other hand, spoke as if he knew the full picture. And Ethan needed answers. I'm going, Ethan said. Orion's jaw tightened. Ethan, Orion, I trust you, Ethan interrupted, turning to him. But I need to know what's happening to me. If this war is real, if there are others like me, then I can't just wait around and hope for the best. Orion exhaled through his nose, his fists clenched. He didn't like it, but he knew Ethan's mind was made up. Then take this, he said, pressing a small device into Ethan's palm. Comms beacon. If this goes south, you call me. No excuses. Ethan nodded, gripping it tightly. Stormbringer didn't say anything. Instead, he turned and took a step back, then vanished in a flash of crackling energy, reappearing at the edge of the rooftop. He turned his head slightly. Follow me! And then he leapt. Electricity surged around him as he soared through the air, landing effortlessly on a distant rooftop. The storm followed him, rippling through the city like a living thing. Ethan swallowed his fear and ran. His body moved before his brain could second-guess itself, his instincts kicking in as he sprinted toward the ledge and jumped. For a moment he was weightless. Then his suit reacted, the built-in energy regulator stabilizing his momentum. He landed harder than Stormbringer, rolling across the rooftop before pushing himself up. Stormbringer glanced back unimpressed. Sloppy, but you'll improve. Ethan rolled his eyes. Thanks for the encouragement. Without another word, Stormbringer took off again, leaping from rooftop to rooftop. Ethan followed, feeling the power in his legs, the electricity humming in his veins as he pushed himself faster. The city blurred around him, the neon lights blending into streaks of color as they moved. They ran for what felt like miles, deeper into the industrial sector of the city. Then suddenly, Stormbringer stopped. Ethan skidded to a halt beside him, breathing hard. Okay, now what? Stormbringer pointed ahead. Below them was an abandoned warehouse, its exterior rusted and worn down by time. But what caught Ethan's attention was the faint blue glow seeping through the cracks in the walls. Energy, like his. Stormbringer spoke, his voice low. Inside that building are people like you. Or at least, what's left of them. Ethan's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Stormbringer turned to face him fully. You wanted answers. Here they are. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and suddenly, the world shifted. A pulse of raw energy coursed through Ethan's mind, his vision flickering with images that weren't his own. He saw darkened halls lined with containment pods, each one filled with a person restrained by glowing restraints. He saw figures in suits, scientists, soldiers, conducting experiments, draining the life from people like him. He saw pain. Ethan gasped and yanked himself back to reality, stumbling away from Stormbringer. His head throbbed. His hands shook. What the hell was that? Stormbringer watched him silent. Ethan's breath came fast. You're telling me there are people like me in there? Prisoners. Stormbringer nodded. And if we don't move fast, they won't be alive much longer. Ethan clenched his fists. The storm inside him was no longer just a hum. It was a roar. He had wanted answers. Now he had something even stronger. A purpose. He turned to Stormbringer, his eyes burning with energy. Then let's go save them. The air crackled with anticipation as Ethan and Stormbringer crouched low behind a rooftop vent. Observing the warehouse below, the faint blue glow continued to seep through the cracks in the building's walls, casting an eerie light across the surrounding industrial lot. Ethan's heart raced, his mind still spinning from the vision Stormbringer had forced into his mind. The images, people like him, trapped, experimented on, flashed through his thoughts like a haunting echo. He clenched his fists again. "They can't wait much longer," he said, his voice taut with determination. Stormbringer didn't respond right away, his eyes scanning the surroundings. "Patience," he finally said, his tone almost casual. "We don't rush in blind." Ethan couldn't help but feel the frustration building in his chest. "But they're in there, trapped." Stormbringer turned to face him, his expression hidden behind the mask. But Ethan could feel the weight of his gaze. "I know what's at stake, but charging in recklessly won't help anyone." He gestured to the building below. "There are security measures in place, and they won't just let us walk in. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart." Ethan nodded, forcing himself to calm down. He understood the logic, even if his emotions were a tempest. The plan was simple. Find a way inside undetected, locate the prisoners, and get them out. But the details were murky. Stormbringer had been through this before, but Ethan hadn't. The thought of breaking into a high-security facility to rescue people like him filled him with a combination of dread and adrenaline. Stormbringer stood up, motioning for Ethan to follow. "We take the back entrance," he said. "It's less guarded, but be quiet. Any noise will draw attention." They moved swiftly through the shadows, using the buildings and alleys for cover, careful to avoid the patrols of armed guards. Ethan's senses were heightened, picking up every shift in the wind, every distant hum of machinery. It was strange to feel so aware of everything around him, but it was the only thing keeping his nerves in check. As they approached the back of the warehouse, Stormbringer halted, pulling out a small device from his jacket. He pressed a button, and a low hum filled the air. The warehouse's security system flickered, then went dark. "We're in," Stormbringer whispered. Ethan followed as they slipped inside through a maintenance door. The interior was cold and sterile, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh, unforgiving glow over the long, empty corridors. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled against the concrete floor. Stormbringer led the way, his movements fluid and precise, as if he had memorized every inch of this place. Ethan mirrored him, staying low, keeping his breathing controlled. It wasn't long before they reached the main section of the building, the area with the containment pods. Ethan could hear faint noises coming from behind the reinforced glass, soft murmurs, low groans. People like him. His gut twisted. They passed rows of high-tech cells, each one holding a prisoner. Some were in a deep, almost comatose sleep, their bodies hooked up to machines that siphoned their energy. Others appeared more alert, their eyes glazed over in fear or despair. Ethan's heart ached as he saw their faces. These were people who had been experimented on, people who had been stripped of their freedom, their humanity. "Focus," Stormbringer said quietly, snapping Ethan out of his trance. Ethan nodded, forcing himself to concentrate. "Where are the others?" Stormbringer pointed to a door at the far end of the room, unguarded by a pair of heavily armed soldiers. "They're in there." Ethan's mind raced. There was no way they could sneak past the guards. They would be spotted the moment they moved. He glanced at Stormbringer. "We'll have to fight them." Stormbringer's eyes narrowed. "We can, but it'll be noisy. If we want to make it out alive, we need a plan." Ethan exhaled slowly. The storm inside him was rising, and with it came an overwhelming urge to just act. But he knew better than to let emotion dictate his every move. Stormbringer seemed to read his thoughts. "Patience," he murmured again, this time with a trace of a smile beneath the mask. "We do this right, or we'll end up dead." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then show me how." Stormbringer didn't hesitate. He moved to the side, pulling out two small devices from his belt. "EMP charges," he said, holding one up. "These will fry their equipment and hopefully knock out the cameras for a few minutes. It's our window." Ethan nodded, preparing himself. His hands were shaking, but he forced them to steady. "Let's do it." Stormbringer moved to the control panel next to the door, and with quick, precise movements, he placed the EMP charge. He gave Ethan a sharp look. "On my mark!" The tension in the air was palpable. Ethan could hear his own heartbeat, each beat echoing in the stillness. The storm inside him was almost uncontrollable now, but he held it in check. He had a role to play. "Now," Stormbringer whispered. The EMP went off with a sudden sharp pulse. The lights flickered, and the low hum of the facility's systems went silent. For a few precious seconds, the room was plunged into darkness. Then in the silence, they moved. The room was bathed in a blinding light as Ethan unleashed everything he had. The surge of energy crackled through the air, tearing at the walls and sending tremors across the facility. For a moment, time itself seemed to slow, as if the very fabric of reality was warping under the intensity of the storm Ethan had summoned. The man's eyes widened as the electricity coursed through him. His energy shield flickered, struggling to maintain its integrity. But instead of falling, he grinned, his body pulsing with the absorbed power. His form now a terrifying reflection of what Ethan could one day become. "You still don't understand, do you?" The man growled, his voice a mix of pain and exhilaration. "This power, this storm, you think you control it? But it's already inside me. I am the future." Ethan's chest tightened as the power within him surged higher, faster, and he realized the truth. The storm wasn't just a force. It was alive inside him, and it could take him further than he'd ever imagined. But that same force was what made him vulnerable. He had to control it. The man staggered under the blast, but steadied himself, his energy field stabilizing again. The electricity that had overwhelmed him moments ago now sparked off his skin, absorbed and redirected into a focused, destructive force. With a violent scream, the man shot forward, moving faster than humanly possible, and crashed into Ethan, sending him skidding backward across the cold floor. The force was so immense, it knocked the breath from Ethan's lungs. He gasped for air, his mind spinning, the storm inside him flickering in and out of control. Stormbringer was on his feet again, his own energy flaring as he moved to help. "Ethan, focus!" he shouted. "You can't beat him by sheer force alone. You need to control it. You control the storm, or it will control you." But it was already too late. The storm had bent Ethan's will, tugging at him, trying to turn him into a weapon, a living conduit of rage and destruction. His pulse raced. His fingers twitched with the raw energy he could barely contain. The man, recovering from the initial shock, stood tall and menacing, his body crackling with power. "You're nothing but a child playing with fire." Ethan's eyes flared with determination. His mind raced, remembering the training, the lessons, the painful growth he'd gone through with Stormbringer. He could control this. He had to. He wouldn't let the storm break him. He closed his eyes for a split second, centering himself. Stormbringer's words echoed in his mind. Control. With a deep breath, Ethan opened his eyes. The storm inside him swirled, but this time it didn't consume him. It followed him. He raised his hand and released the energy in a controlled, focused burst, aimed directly at the man. The force hit the man like a bullet, but instead of crumpling, he absorbed it, twisting it into his own energy. His eyes gleamed and he grinned wickedly. "Is that the best you can do?" But this time, Ethan didn't back down. He pushed harder. He called on the storm again, but this time, he wasn't just throwing power. It was precise, calculated. The man's grin faltered as he tried to absorb the energy, but Ethan's attack was too sharp. With each pulse, Ethan was forcing him back. The storm was his, and with every wave, the man's shield cracked. His energy began to falter. "You," the man began, but his words were cut off as Ethan surged forward, the electricity flowing out of him like an unstoppable wave. The room lit up with blinding energy as Ethan's storm enveloped the man. Then nothing. Silence. Ethan stood, panting heavily, his hands still crackling with energy. He could feel the storm inside him, still there but no longer threatening to overwhelm him. The man was on the ground, twitching but alive, his energy shield dissipated. He glared up at Ethan, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "You've made a mistake." Ethan stepped forward, his eyes cold. "No, I've made my choice." Stormbringer approached, eyeing the fallen man carefully. "He's not the real threat. You are. The storm is inside you. Ethan, that's the war we're fighting, the war between you and yourself. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stared down at the man, his chest still heaving with adrenaline. He could feel the storm still inside him, but for the first time, it was his. "Get him out of here," Stormbringer said, his voice cold. "We've got bigger problems than one failed experiment." Ethan nodded, motioning to the man on the ground. The figure scowled but didn't move. His energy was gone and he was completely at their mercy. Stormbringer pressed a button on his wrist. The containment pods, which had been malfunctioning ever since the EMP pulse, were now locked down again. "We need to go now. The others are waiting, and this place is going to be crawling with more of them." Ethan glanced back at the pods. The prisoners inside, still trapped, needed to be freed. He turned to Stormbringer, his resolve hardening. "We're not done yet." "No, you're not." They moved swiftly, navigating the winding halls of the facility. They reached the containment area, where the remaining prisoners were still held. Stormbringer quickly worked to unlock the pods, freeing the individuals who were still conscious and able to move. Some stumbled out, groggy, disoriented, but others seemed to be more resilient. Ethan saw the looks of terror, of confusion, but also a deep sense of relief. These people were like him, lost, experimented on, and now free. But their journey was far from over. The storm had only just begun. The facility was now behind them, at least for the moment. Ethan, Stormbringer, and the newly freed prisoners were making their way through the winding tunnels beneath the compound. The walls were damp and cold, and the air had a musty metallic scent. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the very earth beneath them could betray them at any moment. The prisoners, though free from their pods, were not unscathed. Some were barely conscious, while others seemed to have suffered more intense modifications. Their eyes flickered with fear, their bodies twitching involuntarily. Ethan could sense their power, some of it faint, some of it volatile. He could see the scars of their past, experiments, torture, manipulation. They had been taken apart and put back together, molded into something unnatural. Ethan's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. He had won the battle against the man, but the war wasn't over. He had seen what they had done to these people, what they had done to him. These weren't just experiments. They were weapons, born from the same storm that lived inside him. And now they were his responsibility. "Where are we going?" one of the prisoners asked, her voice weak but determined. She was tall, her skin pale and scarred, her eyes full of questions. Ethan turned to her, his heart heavy. "We need to regroup. There's a safe house a few miles from here. You'll be safe there for now." The woman nodded, but her eyes lingered on Ethan, as if seeing him for the first time. You're like us, aren't you?" Ethan's jaw tightened. He had no answers for her, not yet, but the truth was inescapable. He wasn't just like them, he was one of them. An experiment, a weapon, a survivor. They had all been broken, shaped by someone else's will. The only difference was that he had escaped, and now he was determined to break free of it once and for all. Stormbringer walked alongside him, his face set in grim lines. "We don't have much time. The organization that did this will come for us. We have to move quickly." Ethan nodded, but his mind wasn't entirely focused on the immediate danger. Something else gnawed at him. The man he had faced, he hadn't been an isolated case. The organization that had created him, that had created all of them, had built a network, a machine designed to forge weapons, and now that machine was hunting them. But there was one thing Ethan knew for certain: the storm inside him, the power he had fought so hard to control, was the key. It was the only thing that had allowed him to survive, and the only thing that could help them all fight back. They reached a hidden door near the end of the corridor, and Stormbringer quickly scanned the area before opening it. Beyond the door, a small, dimly lit room awaited them. It was cramped, filled with basic supplies, food, water, medical kits, but it would suffice for now. As they entered, Stormbringer began preparing the room. "We'll stay here for the night. In the morning, we move out. We need to find out what they've done to the rest of the world, what they're planning next." Ethan looked over at the prisoners, some of whom were already lying down, trying to rest. They had endured so much, and they were still fighting to stay alive. They were his responsibility now. He had to protect them. He had to make sure they didn't fall victim to the same forces that had shaped him. Stormbringer turned to Ethan, his voice low. "You've come far, Ethan, but you need to understand that this is only the beginning. The storm inside you is not a gift. It's a curse. And if you don't learn how to control it, it will destroy you. It will destroy everything you care about." Ethan met his mentor's gaze, his eyes filled with resolve. "I won't let it control me. I'll control it." Stormbringer studied him for a long moment before nodding. "We'll see." Later that night, as the rest of the group settled down, Ethan stood by the window, staring out into the night. His mind kept returning to the same question. Why had they done this to him? Why had they created the storm inside him? He knew the answers were buried deep in the heart of the organization, and he was determined to find them. But as the hours passed, a sense of unease settled over him. The storm within him had calmed for the moment, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way forever. It was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to break free. And the more he pushed it down, the more dangerous it became. He turned away from the window and walked toward Stormbringer, who was sitting in the corner watching him. "I need to know more about this place. More about who they really are and what they want with us." Stormbringer didn't answer immediately. His eyes were distant, lost in thought. "You're right, but there's more at play here than you realize. This isn't just about us. This is about something much bigger, something that goes back further than we know." Ethan sat down beside him, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Stormbringer turned to him, his expression hard. "The storm is just the beginning. They've been experimenting for years, creating weapons, shaping people with abilities like ours. But their ultimate goal, it's not just about control. It's about domination. And they won't stop until they've turned everyone into soldiers." Ethan felt the weight of his words settle in. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back, about stopping an enemy that had already infiltrated every corner of the world. And Ethan knew deep down that he was the key to ending it. He just had to learn how to control the storm inside him before it destroyed everything he cared about. "Then let's stop them," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. Stormbringer's eyes met his. "We will. But first, we need to find out who's really behind this. And I know exactly where to start." Ethan's heart raced. He was ready for whatever came next. He couldn't wait any longer. The storm was rising again, and this time he was going to unleash it. The next morning, the group was on the move again. They had to leave the hidden room quickly. Stormbringer had been quiet last night, but his eyes never stopped scanning, as if sensing danger just beyond the horizon. Ethan could feel the weight of his mentor's silence. There was more to their mission than just escaping the facility. It was about unmasking the true face of the organization that had manipulated them all. As they moved through the underground tunnels, Ethan's thoughts swirled around the words Stormbringer had spoken. Domination, soldiers. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something vast, something that reached far beyond the walls of the facility and touched every corner of the world. The storm inside him surged restlessly, echoing his internal chaos. Stormbringer's voice broke through his thoughts. "Stay close. We're heading to an old contact of mine. She's one of the few who knows about the organization. If anyone can help us, it's her." Ethan nodded, keeping his eyes sharp. The world above them was still a mystery, a vast unknown, filled with dangers he wasn't prepared for. But as long as he had Stormbringer by his side, he felt he could face whatever came next. The group emerged from the tunnels into a dilapidated alleyway, the remnants of a city long forgotten. The buildings were crumbling, windows shattered, and the air was thick with dust. It looked like an old war zone, a place abandoned and left to rot. "This is where we part ways for now," Stormbringer said, stopping in front of an old rusted door. He knocked in a rhythm that seemed almost too precise. After a few moments, a voice came from within, hushed but sharp. "Who is it?" "It's me," Stormbringer replied. "Let us in." The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow hallway that led into a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with maps, photographs, and papers that looked like they had been gathered over years of work. There was no sign of a comfortable life here, just survival and knowledge. The woman who opened the door was tall and lean, with piercing blue eyes and a steely demeanor. Her hair was a silver blonde, short and practical, and her face was hardened with the weight of many years of secrets. She was older than Stormbringer, but not by much. Ethan could tell she had seen things that had shaped her into someone capable of surviving this cruel world. "You must be Ethan," she said, her eyes scanning him for a moment before she stepped aside to let them in. "Stormbringer's told me about you. I didn't think you'd make it this far." Ethan raised an eyebrow, stepping into the room. "What do you know about the organization?" The woman's face darkened, and she motioned for them to sit at a table. "More than I want to, that's for sure. You've all been part of their experiments, right? The ones who can wield the storm?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "You know about us?" She nodded slowly, her expression grim. "I know more than you'd believe, and I know what they're planning. The storm inside you, it's not just a weapon. It's the key to something much bigger." Ethan leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "I mean that they're trying to control the storm," she explained. "But it's not just you. They've been experimenting on hundreds, maybe thousands of people like you. The storm isn't just power, it's a force that they want to use to reshape the world. They're going to weaponize it, and they've been testing different variations of the storm to find the perfect subject." "You're saying they want to control us?" Ethan asked, his voice cold. "Yes," she replied, "and you're the one they've been waiting for. You're the one who can break free of their control." Ethan's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping a force that could change the very fabric of the world. If the organization had been manipulating them all this time, what else were they capable of? "And what do we do about it?" Stormbringer asked, his voice steady. The woman stared at him for a long moment before answering. "You go after the heart of the operation. There's a facility deep underground, hidden from the world. That's where they're conducting their final tests. That's where they're shaping the future. The storm, it's already changing them. Some of them are turning into something else entirely. They're evolving, and if you don't stop them now, there's no telling what will happen." Ethan clenched his fists, his mind racing. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. But could he control the storm long enough to defeat them? Could he face the heart of the operation and not let it consume him? "We'll go," Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll end this." The woman nodded, standing up from the table and pulling out a map. "Here's where you need to go. It's a dangerous journey, but it's the only way. You'll need all the help you can get." She circled a spot on the map. It was a remote location, deep in the mountains, miles from any civilization. Ethan could already feel the weight of what was ahead. The storm within him roared, sensing the battle to come. "We'll be ready," Stormbringer said, looking at Ethan. "But we have to move fast. The organization knows we're still alive, and they'll be coming for us." Ethan looked at the map and then at the woman. "How do you know all this?" Her gaze softened just for a moment. "I used to work for them. I was part of their research team. But I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't watch them destroy everything for the sake of power." Ethan's eyes widened, realizing just how deep the conspiracy ran. "And you're willing to help us?" The woman's lips curled into a thin smile. "It's not about helping you. It's about stopping them. The world has to know the truth. The storm, it has to be destroyed before it consumes us all." As the team prepared for their journey, Ethan's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. He had been marked for death, hunted by the very people who had created him. But now, for the first time, he felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future. And the storm inside him, it was ready to be unleashed. The journey was long and perilous. The road to the underground facility was hidden deep in the mountains, away from prying eyes. Stormbringer, Ethan, and their small group of survivors trekked through dense forests, across rocky terrain and into desolate valleys, always staying on the move. They couldn't afford to rest for too long. Every day, the weight of their mission grew heavier. As they moved deeper into the mountains, the weather began to change. Thick clouds rolled in, shrouding the path in an eerie mist. The air grew colder, and the once silent forest was filled with distant sounds, whispers on the wind, faint echoes that seemed to follow them. It was as if the storm within Ethan had stirred something in the world around them. The storm was always there, its presence buzzing in his mind, pressing against his thoughts. It whispered, calling out to him, as if trying to remind him of what he truly was. A weapon, a soldier, a tool created by forces beyond his control. But he wouldn't give in. He couldn't. "I don't like this," one of the freed prisoners, a man with a wiry frame and hollow eyes, said as he glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Something's watching us." Ethan's instincts flared. He scanned the trees, his senses heightened, but he couldn't detect anything out of the ordinary. Still, the feeling gnawed at him, the unease crawling beneath his skin. "Stay alert," Stormbringer said, his tone sharp. "We're getting close. The facility won't be far from here. If anyone is tracking us, they'll be trying to catch up." Ethan nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As they continued through the mist, the landscape became more hostile. The trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like twisted hands. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. At night, they set up camp in a small clearing. The fire crackled, its light dancing across their faces. The prisoners huddled together, trying to rest. But none of them could escape the anxiety that hung in the air. Ethan could feel it too, the dread, the tension. Something was closing in on them. Stormbringer sat across from him, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We're getting close," he said, his voice low. "But we have to be ready. This won't be a simple raid. The facility is well guarded. They've anticipated our move." Ethan looked at his mentor, the weight of the coming battle settling in. "What exactly are we going to find in there?" he asked. Stormbringer met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "The truth, and the storm's true purpose." Ethan's mind raced. The storm had always been a part of him, but now he wondered if it was something much bigger than just a weapon. What was its real purpose? Why had they given it to him? Was it just to turn him into a tool of destruction? Or was there something more, something deeper at play? Suddenly a crackling sound interrupted his thoughts. A figure emerged from the mist, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, his silhouette barely visible in the fog. He moved with a predator's grace, his steps silent, his eyes fixed on the group. "Who goes there?" Stormbringer's voice was low but firm as he stood, ready for a fight. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, his eyes narrowing. The mist parted just enough for Ethan to catch a glimpse of his face, familiar yet haunting. It was a face he had seen only in his nightmares. "You're not alone," the man said, his voice cold and distant. "They know you're coming, and they've sent me to stop you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The man was one of them, one of the operatives sent to track him down. But what was his connection to the storm? The man stepped forward again, his face now fully visible. It was clear he had been altered. His eyes glowed faintly, and his skin seemed to shimmer with a strange energy. He was not fully human anymore. He was something else, something created. "You've been marked, Ethan," the man said, his gaze piercing through him. "You've always been a part of their plan. You were never meant to escape. And now you're just another tool in their war." Ethan's fists clenched, the storm rising within him. "I'm not their tool," he growled, his voice shaking with fury. "I'll never be anyone's weapon again." The man chuckled darkly, his voice a low growl. "You don't have a choice. They're coming for you, and this time there's no escape." Without warning, the man lunged at them, his movements too fast to follow. Ethan barely had time to react as the man collided with him, sending him crashing into the ground. The force of the impact shook his body, but he quickly recovered, his mind focused, his fists glowing with energy as the storm inside him surged. Stormbringer was already engaged in battle with the other operatives who had emerged from the mist. Ethan could hear the clash of metal and the sound of powers being unleashed, but his attention was fixed solely on the man in front of him. "You're going to regret this," Ethan said through gritted teeth. As the storm inside him roared, ready to break free, the man smirked, his eyes glowing brighter. "You don't know what you're dealing with." But you will. With a sudden movement, he raised his hand, and a burst of energy shot toward Ethan, narrowly missing him as he rolled out of the way. The air around him crackled with electricity, the storm within him responding in kind, surging with power. Ethan shot forward, his body propelled by the energy of the storm, and slammed his fist into the man's chest. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the air, knocking the man back, but he quickly recovered, his own energy flaring in retaliation. The battle raged on, both sides evenly matched. But Ethan could feel the tide of the fight beginning to turn. The storm inside him was awakening, and he was beginning to tap into its full potential. But with every strike, every surge of power, he could feel the danger of losing control. Suddenly there was a sharp, blinding light, a flash of energy that cut through the darkness. Ethan's heart raced. This wasn't just the fight he had been preparing for. This was the beginning of something much more dangerous. The man was not just a foe. He was a messenger, a harbinger of what was to come. "You can't stop it," the man hissed, his voice barely audible over the crackling energy. "The storm is coming for all of us, and you're the one who will bring it." The air around them thickened with tension, and Ethan's mind was flooded with questions. What had the man meant by that? What was the storm truly capable of? And what had they awakened by coming this far?